The lost planet in a galaxy far from Earth, hidden in the depths of space, there was a planet that had been forgotten by time. The planet was known as Zorath, and its existence had been whispered about in old, dusty scrolls of alien civilizations. No one truly knew much about it except that it was a dangerous place, so dangerous, in fact, that no species had dared to visit in centuries. Those who had ventured close enough to study it had vanished without a trace. Zorath was covered in dark clouds that seemed to hang in the sky like an eternal storm. The surface of the planet was rocky and barren, with jagged mountains rising from the ground, casting long shadows over the landscape. The air was thin, making it hard to breathe, and strange, glowing plants that seemed to pulse with an unnatural light grew in small patches, making the land appear eerie and otherworldly. The planet's gravity was heavier than most, and everything on it felt more intense, from the winds to the very ground beneath your feet. Yet, despite its forbidding nature, Zorath was a place of great interest to many. Deep within its forgotten caves and ancient temples, hidden treasure lay waiting, or so the rumors went. But it was the legend of a single artifact that drew the attention of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, the Sword of Thaler, an ancient weapon said to possess unimaginable power. The sword had been lost for millennia, but the stories told of its ability to grant control over the entire universe to whoever could wield it. For centuries, no one had been able to find the sword. It was said to be located deep inside an ancient temple built by a long-lost civilization, a race of beings who had disappeared long ago. No one knew what had happened to them, but their ruins remained, mysterious and deadly. Some believed the sword was cursed. Others thought it was just a myth. But no matter what anyone believed, the planet's reputation kept everyone away. Then, one day, a group of aliens called the Graktar arrived on Zorath. The Graktar were one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, a race known for their incredible strength and intellect. They had conquered many worlds, and their warriors were feared across the stars. The Graktar believed that nothing in the galaxy was beyond their reach, and they had set their sights on the Sword of Thaler. They were determined to find it, believing that with the sword in their possession, it would be unstoppable. The leader of the Graktar was a towering figure named Drax. He was known for his immense strength and his cold, calculating mind. Drax had heard the stories of the sword and believed it could give him the power to rule over all other species in the galaxy. He assembled a team of the bravest and strongest Graktar warriors, and they set off on their journey to Zorath. When they landed on the planet's surface, the Graktar felt an uneasy silence in the air. The storm clouds above them swirled, as if the planet itself was aware of their arrival. They made their way toward the ancient temple, which stood in the distance, its tall spires piercing the sky. The journey was difficult, traîné. Thick fog and strange creatures that lurked in the shadows made every step feel dangerous. But the Graktar were not afraid. They had faced worse dangers in their time. As they neared the temple, Drax could feel a strange energy in the air, as though something ancient and powerful was waiting for them inside. They reached the entrance, a massive stone doorway covered in glowing runes. Drax stepped forward, his heart pounding with excitement and anticipation. The other Graktar warriors stood behind him, watching as he approached the entrance. Inside, the temple was dark and filled with deadly traps designed to keep out intruders. But the Graktar were well trained, and they moved through the temple with ease, avoiding the pitfalls and hidden dangers that lay in their path. Finally, after what seemed like hours of walking through the dark corridors, they reached the inner chamber. It was vast and open, with a high ceiling covered in intricate carvings. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal was the Sword of Thaler. The sword was unlike anything the Graktar had ever seen. It was long and gleaming, its blade shining with an otherworldly glow. The hilt was made of a strange material that seemed to shimmer as if it were alive. It was a weapon of great beauty, but also a weapon of immense power. The moment Drax laid eyes on it, he knew that it was his destiny to wield it. Drax stepped forward, his massive hands reaching for the sword. But as his fingers brushed the hilt, a shock of energy shot through his body, and he was thrown back. He hit the ground hard, struggling to breathe as the energy seemed to drain from him. The other Graktar rushed to his side, but Drax waved them off. He stood up, determination in his eyes. He knew then that the sword was no ordinary weapon. It was something far more powerful, something that only the worthy could wield. But the question was, who was worthy? The Graktar were the strongest beings in the galaxy, but they had failed to lift the sword. Perhaps there was something more to this artifact than pure strength. Drax's mind raced. He would not give up. He would find a way to lift the sword, no matter what it took. The first attempt at air on Zorith seemed to grow heavier as Drax stood before the ancient sword, its otherworldly glow casting an eerie light on the stone floor. His heart raced, his body still aching from the shockwave of energy that had thrown him back when he had first tried to touch the blade. The sword seemed to hum with a mysterious power, as though it was alive, aware of their presence. Tar. Warriors gathered around him, their expressions filled with confusion and doubt. "We've come this far," Drax muttered to himself, clenching his fists. His pride as a leader, as the mightiest of the Graktar, was on the line. He had faced countless enemies and conquered many planets. But this was different. This sword, this relic, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was as if the sword itself was testing them. Not only their strength, but something deeper. The Graktar warriors, who had stood by Drax's side in countless battles, exchanged uncertain glances. They had seen their leader fall, something that had never happened before. If Drax, with all his strength, could not lift the sword, what hope did they have? A low murmur rippled through the group, the fear of failure growing with every passing second. Drax, however, stood firm. He was a warrior, a conqueror, and his pride would not allow him to be bested by a mere artifact. "Stand back," he ordered, his voice calm, though his mind raced. The other Graktar warriors stepped aside, giving Drax space. He took a deep breath, his massive chest rising and falling with the effort. His eyes narrowed, focused solely on the sword. "Let me try again," Drax said, his tone low and determined. The air seemed to crackle with energy as Drax took a step forward, his armored boots making a faint echo in the stillness of the temple. The stone walls seemed to pulse as if the entire structure was alive, watching him, waiting. Drax reached out his hand, his fingers brushing against the glowing hilt of the sword. Immediately, a surge of energy shot up his arm, burning through. His veins stronger than before. This time, Drax did not hesitate. He gritted his teeth and pulled harder, muscles bulging as he struggled against the force that was pushing back. Sweat poured down his face, his body trembling with the effort. Every ounce of strength, every bit of will he had was focused on lifting the sword. The Graktar warriors watched in silence, their eyes wide, their breath held. They had never seen Drax like this before, unstoppable, relentless in his pursuit. The sword, however, remained unmoving. No matter how much strength he exerted, it stayed fixed on the pedestal, as though it were rooted in the very heart of the planet. Drax's face turned red with exertion, veins bulging from his neck. His pulse raced in his ears. He could feel the sword's energy pushing back against him, resisting him. The harder he pulled, the more the sword seemed to laugh at him, taunting him. His mind screamed for him to succeed, to show that no force in the galaxy could stand in his way. But as he pulled once more, his hands began to tremble, and a deep, thunderous roar seemed to shake the very foundation of the temple. It was not the sound of victory, but of defeat. With one last, desperate pull, Drax fell backward, crashing to the cold stone floor, breathless and humiliated. "Drax," one of the Graktar warriors whispered, his voice filled with awe and concern. The leader remained still on the ground for a moment, his chest heaving with each breath. He had never failed like this before, and the realization gnawed at him. The sword had defeated him, just as it had defeated every other warrior who had attempted to claim it. His pride, once unshakable, now felt like a distant memory. Drax slowly pushed himself to his knees, staring at the sword that lay so close yet so unreachable. His mind raced. He had been wrong to assume that power alone could make him worthy. There had to be something else, a hidden test, a deeper challenge that none of them had yet understood. "Gather yourself," Drax muttered to himself. He stood up slowly, wiping the sweat from his brow. He turned to his warriors, who were still silent, watching him with uncertainty in their eyes. "We are not leaving," Drax said firmly, his voice regaining its commanding tone. "The sword is not impossible to lift. There is a reason it resists us, and we will find it. Strength alone will not win this battle. We must think. Think like the ancients. There is a reason this sword exists, and we must understand it." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was more than he had ever imagined, a weapon of ultimate power, a weapon that could control life itself. He hadn't asked for any of this. He was just a wanderer, trying to survive in a galaxy that had forgotten his people. But now it seemed that fate had thrust him into something far beyond his understanding. The sword's hum grew louder, almost as if it was responding to Drax's words. Marcus tightened his grip around the hilt, feeling the energy surge through him once again. It wasn't a physical sensation. It was something in his mind, something in his very soul, as if the sword was testing him, probing him for something that lay deep within. Then it hit him. The sword wasn't testing his strength. It wasn't testing his physical power. It was testing his will and his ability to choose, to lead, to understand the consequences of the power he now held. Suddenly, the walls of the temple seemed to shift, and the entire room filled with an overwhelming light. The air around Marcus thickened, and for a brief moment he felt as though he were no longer in the temple, but standing at the edge of the universe itself. The sword in his hands grew hot, and he could hear whispers from the past, ancient. Voices that had long since faded into silence. "You are the one." A voice seemed to echo, though it was impossible to tell where it came from. "The one who can wield the power of the ancients. But know this, with great power comes great responsibility. You must choose how you use it. Choose wisely, for the fate of all life will depend on your decision." Marcus's heart raced. What was happening? Was he truly the one the sword had been waiting for? The weight of that thought was almost unbearable. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a conqueror. He was just a man, trying to survive in a galaxy that had forgotten humanity. But the sword had chosen him. And now he understood why. It wasn't because he was the strongest or the most skilled. It was because he had the strength to choose to make the hard decisions when others might falter. The ancients had created the sword to be wielded by someone who could understand the consequences of its power. The light around Marcus began to fade, and the whispers grew quieter. He could still feel the sword's energy pulsing through his body, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was a part of him now. He was connected to it, and he knew what he had to do. "Drax," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I don't know what this means for me, or for the galaxy. But I can't let the sword fall into the wrong hands. It's too dangerous, too powerful. I have to protect it." Drax's expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or acknowledgement. "You are more than I thought, human," he said quietly. Perhaps this sword has chosen wisely after all. The Graktar leader stepped back, and the other warriors followed suit. They were no longer sure of the path forward, but they knew that. Marcus held the key to the sword's true power. Marcus stood in the center of the chamber, the sword still glowing softly in his grip. He had made his choice, but as the light from the sword dimmed, he couldn't shake the feeling that the true challenge was only just beginning. The power of the ancients was now in his hands, and with it came a responsibility that could change the course of history, and Marcus knew that whatever happened next, the galaxy would never be the same. The alien challenged. The glow of the sword seemed to fade just slightly. Its power now subtle, but constant, like the hum of an unseen engine, driving Marcus forward. He could feel its weight in his hand, though not in the physical sense, more like a responsibility, an echo of its immense potential. But despite the sword's calming presence, the tension in the room had only grown thicker. The Graktar warriors circled around him, watching closely. Drax stood in front of him, his powerful gaze locked on Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and something else. Doubt. For the first time since he had arrived on Zorith, Marcus felt the full weight of what the sword truly meant. The Graktar, once confident and unshakable, were now wary of him, their belief in their own superiority starting to crumble. Drax was the most powerful among them, a leader who had never known defeat. Yet here he was, watching a Humana creature he had always seen as inferior hold the most powerful weapon in the galaxy. Drax's voice broke the silence. "You may have the sword, human," he said, his tone even, but with an edge of something dangerous. But power like this cannot be wielded lightly. The ancients created this weapon for a reason. They understood what it could do. If you fail, it will destroy you. Do you truly believe you can control it? Marcus looked up, meeting Drax's stare. The Graktar leader's words struck deep. The sword had chosen him, but had it made a mistake? What if the weight of the responsibility was too much? What if his decision to take the sword was driven by nothing more than desperation and pride? He didn't answer Drax right away. Instead, he took a slow breath, trying to center himself. It wasn't about strength, he realized. It never had been. The sword had chosen him for something else, for his ability to carry the weight of choice, to lead, to sacrifice. But was he strong enough to follow through? Marcus raised the sword slightly, his hand steady. "I don't know if I can control it, Drax," he said quietly, "but I do know that I can't let it fall into the wrong hands. And right now, I'm the only one who can stop it from doing more harm." For a long moment, Drax said nothing. His gaze lingered on Marcus, calculating, weighing the human's resolve. His warriors shifted uneasily, unsure of where this conversation would lead. But then Drax spoke again, his voice low and filled with an unmistakable challenge. "If you truly believe you are the one to wield this sword," Drax said, "then prove it to us. Show us your strength." The other Graktar shifted, their muscles tensing as they sensed what was coming. Drax wasn't backing down. This wasn't a test of mere physical strength, it was something more. This was a challenge to Marcus's resolve, his very will to lead, to stand against the might of the Graktar. And Drax would not let Marcus claim the sword without proving his worth. Marcus's heart raced, but he didn't hesitate. He had made his decision. The sword wasn't just about strength, it was about the ability to see beyond the immediate fight, to understand the consequences of every action. The Graktar were powerful, yes, but they had relied too long on brute force. Now, Marcus was being asked to show something different, something they would never understand. "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked, his voice steady. Drax smiled slightly, though it wasn't a friendly gesture. "A duel, human. You will fight me and prove that you are worthy of the sword. If you cannot defeat me, then it will be clear that you are not the one to wield its power. The challenge hung in the air, thick with tension. Marcus could feel the weight of the sword in his hand, but it wasn't the sword he was worried about. It was Drax. The Graktar leader was a giant among giants, his power unmatched. Marcus wasn't a fighter, he'd never been one. But this wasn't about fighting for the sword, it was about fighting for something much bigger than himself. Drax stepped back, signaling to his warriors to stand aside. The Graktar parted, forming a wide circle around Marcus and their leader. The sound of their boots on the stone echoed through the temple, creating a rhythm that felt almost like a countdown. The air was thick with anticipation. Marcus took a deep breath and drew the sword. Its weight was unfamiliar, but it felt right in his hands. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do, but he knew that the sword wasn't just for slashing or stabbing. It was a symbol of something more. A symbol of leadership, of sacrifice. If he was to win this fight, it wouldn't be by overpowering Drax. It would be by proving that he could do what the Graktar never could. Think before acting. Drax advanced, his massive frame moving with the speed and precision of a trained warrior, his eyes locked on Marcus, his every movement filled with intent. Marcus took a step back, raising the sword instinctively, trying to focus. The blade pulsed in his grip, almost as if it was guiding him, showing him what he needed to do. Drax came at him with a roar, swinging a massive fist toward Marcus. But Marcus didn't strike. Instead, he sidestepped, ducking under Drax's blow. The sword hummed, its energy flowing through him, not as a weapon to fight with, but as an extension of his mind. He wasn't trying to overpower Drax. He was trying to outthink him. Drax growled in frustration, his eyes burning with the desire to crush the human. But Marcus was faster than he had anticipated. The sword, light and quick in his hands, deflected another blow. And Marcus danced around the Graktar leader's heavy strikes. This wasn't a contest of raw strength. It was a contest of will. Drax's rage and arrogance were his greatest strengths, but also his greatest weaknesses. Marcus knew he had to outlast him. With every step, Marcus could feel the power of the sword guiding him. The sword that had chosen him because of his ability to think when others acted with brute force. He was not a warrior, but he didn't need to be. He had something that Drax could never possess, the understanding that sometimes the greatest power came from within. Drax swung again, but this time Marcus didn't dodge. He stepped forward. Locking eyes with the Graktar leader, he raised the sword high, and with a single fluid motion, he struck. The unlikely hero of the air in the ancient temple seemed to shift with a quiet tension, as if the entire structure was holding its breath. Marcus stood before the sword, his hand still gently wrapped around its hilt. The moment his fingers touched the glowing weapon, something inside him clicked. It was a strange, unfamiliar sensation, a deep connection that ran beyond the physical. The sword, once an immovable relic, now seemed to respond to him, almost as if it recognized him. For a moment, Marcus felt as though he was suspended between worlds. The darkness of the temple faded, and he could almost hear the whispers of ancient voices, lost to time, speaking directly to him. The power of the sword surged through him, not in a violent rush, but like a slow, steady current. He was aware of the Graktar warriors standing in the shadows, watching him, but their presence barely registered. In that moment, he was alone. With the sword and its mysterious power, the glowing blade pulsed in his grip, and Marcus found himself instinctively lifting it. It wasn't heavy, as he expected, but light, almost weightless, as if the sword itself had become an extension of his arm. The otherworldly hum that emanated from it seemed to resonate in his very bones, sending a strange warmth through his body. Drax, the Graktar leader, watched with wide eyes, His mouth hung slightly open in disbelief. The human, this frail, insignificant creature by Graktar standards, was doing what they could not. He was lifting the sword with ease, as though he were destined to hold it. Drax's mind raced, his thoughts clouded with confusion. How was this possible? The other Graktar warriors were equally stunned. They exchanged nervous glances, whispering among themselves, unable to understand what was unfolding before them. Their greatest warriors, the strongest beings in the galaxy, had failed to lift a sword. Yet here stood a human, someone they had dismissed as weak, succeeding where they had all faltered. "Impossible," muttered one of the Graktar, his voice laced with disbelief. Drax's pride stung, but there was no time to dwell on his humiliation. He stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing in the chamber. He approached Marcus, eyes narrowed, still unable to grasp what was happening. "Who are you, human?" Drax's voice was low, yet carried with an unspoken threat. "How did you? What is this?" Marcus blinked, snapping out of his trance-like state. He slowly turned his head to face Drax, the sword still in his hand. He hadn't meant to do anything special. He had simply touched the sword, drawn to it as if some unseen force had guided him. But now, with the Graktar standing before him, his body filled with a sudden surge of doubt. What had just happened? He had no idea why the sword had chosen him more, why it was so easy for him to lift it. "I don't know," Marcus replied honestly, his voice steady despite the tension. "I just felt it. I touched it, and it felt like it was meant to be in my hand. I didn't even try to lift it." Drax's gaze never left the sword. The Graktar leader's mind was whirling. He had spent years learning the legends of the sword, studying the history of Zorith. He had assumed the sword would respond only to those with unimaginable strength, beings who could bend planets to their will. But Marcus had none of that power. He wasn't like the Graktar. He was human, and yet he had accomplished what no one else could. The sword's power was undeniable. It was alive, in a way, responding to something deep within Marcus, something the Graktar could not comprehend. "You are not like us," Drax said slowly, his voice betraying a mix of admiration and curiosity. "You have no strength, no power, and yet the sword, I'm not sure what's happening." Marcus interrupted, feeling uncomfortable under Drax's intense gaze. "But I don't think this is about strength. It's more like the sword is testing something else." Drax's eyes flickered. Testing something else. What did that mean? The Graktar leader had never considered that possibility. Strength, willpower, intellect, these were qualities that defined the greatest beings in the galaxy. But what if the sword was measuring something beyond that? What if it was testing the heart? For a long moment, Drax didn't speak. He just stared at the human before him, struggling to understand what had just occurred. Finally, he took a step back, his mind racing. The Graktar warriors around him were equally perplexed, watching Marcus carefully. Drax straightened up and squared his shoulders. If the sword had chosen Marcus, then the human must be more than he appeared. Drax wasn't about to admit defeat, but he realized now that the battle for the sword wasn't one of physical might. There was something else at play here, something that only the human could comprehend. "You are different," Drax muttered, though more to himself than to anyone else. "The sword has chosen you, and there is no denying it." Marcus, still holding the sword, looked up at Drax. The tension in the air was palpable, but he wasn't sure what to make of it. He wasn't a warrior, wasn't even close. He was just an explorer, someone who had accidentally stumbled into the middle of a power struggle. Yet here he was, standing with an ancient weapon that had eluded the strongest species in the galaxy. The sword had chosen him, and now he was unsure whether it was a gift or a curse. "I didn't ask for this," Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But it's clear the sword wants me to do something. I don't know what that is, but I'm not leaving until I figure it out." Drax regarded him closely, studying the human for a moment longer. He wasn't sure whether he should respect Marcus's resolve or challenge him for the sword. But in the end, he knew that this was something bigger than him, something bigger than the Graktar. The sword was meant for the human, and no amount of strength or pride could change that. "Very well," Drax said, his voice calm. "You hold the sword. But remember this, human power comes at a cost. What you do with it will determine your fate and ours." With those words, the Graktar leader stepped back, leaving Marcus standing alone in the chamber, the sword glowing softly in his grasp. For the first time, Marcus realized that the path ahead of him was no longer just about survival. It was about something far greater, something he had yet to understand. And so, the unlikely hero stood in the heart of an ancient temple. Unaware of the storm that was about to unfold, the true power, the temple chamber was silent, save for the soft hum of the ancient sword in Marcus's hands. It seemed almost alive, pulsating with a strange energy that Marcus could feel deep within his chest. As he held the blade, he wondered how something so beautiful and deadly could hold so much power that had eluded even the mightiest of beings in the galaxy. But what did it mean? What was the sword trying to tell him? Marcus turned the blade in his hand, examining it more closely. The hilt was carved with intricate symbols, unlike anything he'd ever seen before. They seemed to shift in the light, as if they were constantly changing. The blade itself shimmered with a faint, otherworldly glow, its surface smooth and flawless. But it was the feeling it gave him that unsettled him the most. The sword didn't just seem powerful-eyed, felt like it was waiting, as if it was trying to communicate something deep inside him. Drax and the other Graktar warriors stood at the edges of the chamber, watching the human with a mix of awe and suspicion. They had never seen anything like this before. The sword had resisted all of them beings of unimaginable strength, but it had chosen this human, this fragile, weak creature by their standards. Something about it didn't sit right with Drax. He was a conqueror, a leader who had never been outmatched. Yet here he was, standing in the presence of a human who had done what no one else could. Drax took a step forward, his gaze fixed on Marcus. "What are you feeling?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. Marcus didn't look up immediately, still lost in the swirling energy of the sword. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "It's like the sword is alive. It's trying to tell me something. I can feel it." Arax raised an eyebrow. He had never believed in the mystical elements of the galaxy, always relying on science and strength. But what Marcus was saying, what Marcus was feeling, was beyond his understanding. He had seen powerful artifacts before, but none had ever been like this. None had ever been so alive. For a moment, Drax said nothing. He couldn't help but wonder if the sword's power had chosen Marcus for a reason. The human might be weak physically, but there was something about him that the Graktar could not ignore. Perhaps there was more to Marcus than met the eye. "I have studied the history of this planet," Drax finally said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "I know the legends. This sword was forged by the ancients, a race that lived long before the Graktar came to be. They were masters of both science and mysticism, able to harness the forces of the universe. This sword was their greatest creation, a weapon designed not just for war, but for the ultimate control of life itself." Marcus looked up, his expression filled with confusion. "So this sword is ... a weapon of war?" Drax nodded. "Yes, but it is more than that. The ancients believed that the sword would choose a worthy heir, someone who could unlock its true potential. That's why it resisted us. It was never meant for strength alone, but for something deeper, something none of us understood." Drax froze, his breath coming in short gasps. The sword didn't cut him, it didn't need to. It was the symbol of Marcus's victory, the declaration that he had defeated the Graktar, not with strength, but with wisdom, courage, and resolve. Drax's knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, defeated, not by force, but by the power of the human spirit. The ultimate victory. The chamber was silent, save for the heavy breathing of the fallen Graktar leader, Drax. He lay on the cold stone floor, his massive form trembling as he struggled to push himself up. Marcus stood above him, the ancient sword still glowing softly in his hands, its power now seemingly calm but undeniable. Around them, the Graktar warriors stared in stunned silence. The one they had feared, the one they had followed, was now kneeling in defeat at the feet of a human. Marcus took a step back, his pulse pounding in his ears. He hadn't expected to win this way. The sword had not granted him unmatched strength, nor had it turned him into a warrior of legends. What had happened here was far more significant. He had won by understanding the true nature of power, not through force, but through intellect, patience, and an understanding that strength alone was not enough. The sword had chosen him because he understood what they did not. It was not about defeating your opponent. It was about knowing when to act and when to stand firm. Drax's eyes flickered as he struggled to rise. His pride as a leader had been shattered, but beneath his frustration, there was a flicker of admiration, something he hadn't expected to feel for a human. You have defeated me, Drax rasped, his voice hoarse. But not in the way I thought you would. Marcus stood tall, but he did not boast. He simply held the sword at his side, feeling its hum beneath his fingertips. I didn't want to defeat you, Drax. I wanted to show you that power isn't always about strength or domination. It's about understanding when to fight and when to step back, when to lead and when to listen. Drax slowly stood, his movements heavy but deliberate. He looked at Marcus with new respect, though it was a difficult thing for a leader like him to admit. Perhaps you are right, Drax muttered, his pride still bruised, but beginning to recognize the truth in Marcus's words. Maybe I've been blind all this time. Power isn't something to wield without thought, it's something to carry with responsibility. The other Graktar warriors, who had once stood in awe of Drax, now turned their gaze to Marcus. They had seen their leader defeated not by force, but by wisdom. They could not deny the lesson that had unfolded before them. Marcus had shown them that strength, however impressive, could be hollow if it wasn't backed by understanding. One of the warriors stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with awe. You are ... different, human, he said. We have never seen someone like you. Perhaps the sword's choice was not a mistake after all. The sword, still glowing in Marcus's hands, seemed to hum in response, almost as if agreeing. It was a hum of acceptance, of unity, as if acknowledging the shift that had occurred not just in the temple, but in the hearts of those present. The Graktar were beginning to understand something fundamental. They had believed themselves to be the supreme beings in the galaxy, above all others. But Marcus had shown them that it wasn't strength alone that made a being powerful. It was wisdom, compassion, and the ability to see beyond oneself. That was what made someone worthy of power. Marcus lowered the sword slightly, feeling its weight shift in his hands. I didn't come here to take over Drax, he said, his voice calm but firm. Came here to stop the sword from falling into the wrong hands. And now that I have it, I will protect it, not to rule, but to ensure it doesn't destroy everything. Drax stood quietly for a moment, the weight of Marcus's words settling in. You will protect the sword. And in turn, you will protect us all, he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. He understood now that Marcus wasn't just a human wielding an ancient weapon. T was a symbol, a beacon of what could happen when power was used responsibly. The Graktar warriors seemed to shift in their positions, their stances less threatening and more contemplative. One by one, they bowed their heads to Marcus, not as a conqueror, but as a leader. They had come to respect him, not because he had defeated them in battle, but because he had shown them a new way of thinking, a new way of leading. Marcus looked around at the warriors, each of them a giant in his own right. They were powerful, but now they understood the balance of strength and wisdom. He wasn't their king, nor did he want to be. He was something different, a leader in a way they had never considered. "We may have lost our way," Drax said, finally breaking the silence. "But we are not lost. Together, we will find a new path. A path where strength and wisdom coexist." Marcus nodded, his grip on the sword loosening just slightly as he felt a calm settle over him. The sword had chosen him for a reason, and he realized now that it wasn't just for him, was for all of them. They had been tested, not by the sword itself, but by what the sword represented, the power to shape the future. With that realization, the weight of the sword in his hands felt different. It was no longer a burden, but a responsibility. Marcus understood that his journey was only just beginning. The sword had shown him that true power wasn't just about what you could take, it was about what you were willing to protect. Drax and the other Graktar stepped back, allowing Marcus to stand alone in the center of the temple. The air around them seemed to calm, the oppressive weight that had hung over Zorath lifting. The planet had been a battleground for many years, a place of conflict and endless struggle. But now, with the sword in Marcus's hands, it could become something more. Marcus raised the sword high, not in triumph, but as a symbol of hope, symbol that power, when wielded with wisdom and responsibility, could change the course of history. And with that, he knew his true challenge had only just begun. Asterisk.